The Fox News decision desk can now officially project that Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States.
Sending all education back to the states.
It will be strictly non-political, and there will be no wokeness or jihadism allowed.
Get transgender out of our elementary schools and middle schools and high school.
A concept that was never heard of in all of human history. Nobody's ever heard of this. The radical left invented it just a few years ago.
George Floyd obviously was not about race. It was about destabilizing the Trump administration.
Department of Education.
Abolished.
Gone.
Just abolish the department, full stop, and that's it, you know?
We need to hold the doors of the Capitol.
Because he's a child molester, the man. He's walking the streets, he's molesting children. The man should be put in jail.
I've combed over absolutely everything Trump and his advisors have said about their plans for education in America, and it's nothing short of terrifying. In this video, I'm going to go over absolutely everything I found, as well as provide some context, as well as some analysis, explaining why all this matters so much, and why it's fundamentally more dangerous than you probably think. Donald Trump has won the 2024 election and will be our 47th president. There's many reasons why this isn't going to be anything like the Trump we saw in 2016, as he's completely let loose from traditional checks and balances. He and his advisors have an even more dangerous plan than you probably think is possible. This time, even his most insane plans stand little to no chance of being challenged by his own people. Trump has learned from his 2016 presidency that to get what he wants, he's going to need to be surrounded by unwavering yes men. This time, not choosing established career politicians based on their merit, but rather filling every spot that he can with only the most loyal followers of Trumpism. This will have dangerous consequences for the average American, regardless if you think you're safe or not. To demonstrate this, I'm going to go over how Trump plans to destroy American education. The very first thing that we have to establish is that Trump has been planning everything he wants to do for a very long time now, since his very first term in 2016 all the way up to current day. This is shown best by his Agenda 47. Agenda 47 is his public platform that combines some of his oldest and newest policies into one plan for his second term. So we're going to see many of the same policies that we saw in 2016, but now with higher chances of the most extreme ones actually happening. The main difference this time is that everyone around him is incredibly motivated to push their own personal agendas into law in ways that just weren't possible in recent history. And of course, their biggest agenda of all is Project 2025. Brought to you by the people at the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025 is a nearly 900-page plan of what policies should be pushed for whoever the next Republican candidate would be. Realistically, Trump was the only option, as the other Republican candidates were fighting for second place.
Ask you, the Trump-Russia collusion hoax that you pushed on this network for years, was that real, or was that Hillary Clinton made up disinformation? Answer the question. Go.
The Project 2025 mandate calls for radical changes to every aspect of American life to better conform to rich Christian nationalist values. We're completely past the point of plausible deniability. Trump's plan is Project 2025. While he does have his own unique goals, Trump's public support of the Heritage Foundation, combined with countless Project 2025 contributors being appointed by Trump to different areas of government, means that the agenda will find its way into policy one way or another, and to think otherwise is just denial. More than half of all the writers and editors for Project 2025 were part of the first Trump administration in some way, and many key minds of Project 2025 have already been handpicked by Trump to serve a role in his second term. Dangerous individuals such as Russell Vought.
I expect you to hear 10 more times from the rally, the president, distancing himself from the left's boogeyman of Project 2025. He's very supportive of what we do. He's been at our organization. He's raised money for our organization. He's blessed it.
The conversation covers a host of issues, like abortion and how his position differs from Trump.
He talks about rape, incest, and the life of the mother. I don't actually believe in those exceptions. I want to get to abolition, but we got to win elections. I want to make sure that we can say we're a Christian nation, and my viewpoint is mostly that I would probably be Christian nationism. That's pretty close to Christian nationalism. George Floyd obviously was not about race. It was about destabilizing the Trump administration. Right. 80% of my time is working on the plans of what's necessary to take control of these bureaucracies.
Stephen Miller.
A number of states, for example, have passed laws saying that you can't have this in the curriculum, or you can't have that in the curriculum, and you can't teach DEI, and so on and so forth. Without exception, I can promise you, all the commies in the classroom changed the name of their lecture, changed one word, changed one little paragraph in the syllabus, and did the exact same damn thing every single day because they're communists and that's what they do. Were they sued? No. Were they arrested if they broke a law and it's applicable? No. Did any DA anywhere, if you're talking about trans issues, think of arresting somebody for abusing children with trans ideology? No. We write blog posts about it. That's what we do. Write the law so it protects your friends and harms the bad guys. Otherwise, you're handing them a sword to run right through you. Well, as I say sometimes, the immigration issue is extremely simple. Seal the border, deport all the illegals. And then you also deploy the military to the southern border, not just with a mission to observe, but with an impedance and denial mission. In other words, you reassert the fundamental constitutional principle that you don't have a right to enter into our sovereign territory, to even request the asylum claim.
And Tom Homan.
President-elect Trump's new border czar says mass deportation efforts will begin right here in Chicago and issues a warning to Mayor Johnson.
If your Chicago mayor doesn't want to help, he can step aside. But if he impedes us, if he knowingly harbors and conceals an illegal alien, I will prosecute him.
What we had heard from immigration advocates is that this is going to provide a chilling effect to parents in the school drop-off line or something of that matter.
It shouldn't be a chilling effect unless their child is a terrorist or a public safety threat. If they are a public safety threat, national security threat, they should be chilled. They should be afraid.
Well, if their parent is here and they're an undocumented immigrant, I think was more of the argument that they were making.
They're not off the table either. I mean, if they're in a country illegally, they got a problem.
Is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families?
Of course there is. Families can be deported together.
Are all set to play a key role in establishing the Project 2025 agenda in their respective fields. To even begin to understand what the Trump administration has planned for education, we have to know what the Department of Education is and why it's so vital to American education. The Department of Education is a cabinet-level department that was formed as we currently know it by recently deceased President Jimmy Carter. He split the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare into two separate departments, the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Education. The Department of Education has three main functions that are incredibly straightforward. First off, they distribute funds in the form of loans, grants, and scholarships. Secondly, they collect all sorts of data from schools, teachers, and students on many different data points. And lastly, the Department of Education has the incredibly important task of prohibiting all forms of discrimination in schools and ensuring every student receives an equal education. This currently includes all forms of recognized discrimination such as race, ethnicity, age, disability, and sexual orientation. The inclusion of trans and gender nonconforming protections is something that we first saw under the Obama administration. Then it was removed by the Trump administration, only to be added back and expanded on by the Biden administration. Trump has once again promised to repeal these protections in his second term. The Department of Education employs around 4,000 government officials, ranking 26 in full-time government employees and making it the smallest out of all 15 cabinet departments. Having a budget of around $260 billion, that money, which is only around 4% of the total federal budget, is responsible for ensuring quality and equal education for all of America. This money primarily goes to federal student loans, financial assistance, K-12 public schools, and special education. On average, the Department of Education funds around 8 to 13% of K-12 education, with the rest being made up by state and local funds that mostly come from property taxes. It's important to remember that federal funding makes up the difference that state and local funds just can't make up for. One of the largest federal funds is something known as Title I, something that millions of Americans, including myself, owe their entire education to. Title I provides extra funding to the poorest districts as well as any schools that are failing or at risk of failing standards. This funding is often the only difference between disadvantaged students receiving a quality education in any form. For example, many special education programs only exist because of federal funding. The Department of Education also has the job of monitoring and preventing segregation and disproportional punishment in schools, as well as keeping track and recording data on homeless students. But they don't just collect this data. They're constantly looking through it to find disproportional cases of punishment or segregation in schools and districts that might not otherwise be found. This is an incredibly important job that just can't be done effectively at the state and local level, and it shouldn't be trusted to be done at a state and local level either. Trump and his people have taken a hard stance against using this data to prove any sort of large-scale civil injustices, and would rather that the department just collect the data and not analyze it at all. Because of this, we could potentially see a drastic rise in unreported systemic issues that would have a much harder time to be challenged in the courts. The Department of Education is incredibly important to all students in America as it holds the states accountable to give every student the best education they can when some states would otherwise choose not to. The Department of Education doesn't tell schools what to teach or how to teach it. That's still overwhelmingly decided by state and local schools. Now that we understand a bit of what the Department of Education does and its importance, we can get into the real meat of Trump's plans for education. First off, he wants the the Department of Education completely gone. Trump has repeated a narrative that the Department of Education is a completely useless, bloated governmental overreach that provides little to nothing in return for a massive cost to the taxpayer.
In Washington, you know, half of the buildings, such a large number, every building you pass in Washington says Department of Education.
He has said that removing the Department of Education could cut the spending on education in America in half, while somehow improving the education for all students.
We're going to spend less than half, and we're going to have much better education.
He keeps saying that American education literally can't get any worse, so why not send it to the states and see how they do?
And sending all education and education work and needs back to the states. We want them to run the education of our children, because they'll do a much better job of it. You can't do worse. We spend more money per pupil by 3 times than any other nation, and yet we're absolutely at the bottom. We're one of the worst. So you can't do worse.
The problem is that he's completely disregarding the huge positive impact that the Department of Education has on every single American student. The choices we make for education matter, and the consequences of removing the Department of Education would objectively make education worse for almost all Americans, as we would lose the governing body that ensures human rights violations are not allowed to run rampant. But thankfully, even Trump has seemed to realize that completely closing the Department of Education would be incredibly unlikely, as they would need 60 Senate votes to make it happen, and that would require not only all Republicans to vote yes on this, but some Democrats as well, which as of now just isn't going to happen. So instead, his talking points have changed from removing the Department of Education to gutting the department as much as possible and shifting many of its components to other departments to lessen its power and make it truly ineffective. He's repeatedly said how he could cut down the Department of Education down to just 2 people.
I figure we'll have like 1 person plus a secretary. You'll have a secretary and a secretary.
Other times, he said that he could cut it down to the size of a small room.
But we'll have a very small staff. We can occupy that staff right in this room, actually. I think this room is too large.
Endlessly repeating how he plans on stripping down education in America to just the bare basics.
What are you doing? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. And all they're going to do is they're going to see that the basics are taken care of. You know, we don't want to have somebody get crazy and start teaching a language that we don't want them to teach.
Trump plans on aggressively cutting all spending that he can and making public education financially profitable for private groups. This means saying goodbye to traditionally safe federal loans, as he plans on getting rid of them, opening up poor students to the reality of facing even more predatory personal loans or potentially not even seeking higher education at all. And if you already have a federal student loan, forgiveness programs are completely off the table, as well as any program that would lower your payment amounts. To go with this, Trump has set his sights on ending everything he deems to be woke in education. Trump has promised to cut federal funding to any state or school who does not want to comply with their new rules, and will increase funding to the states that do.
We will cut federal funding for any school or program pushing critical race theory, gender ideology, or other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content.
Ironically, by threatening to revoke federal aid from some schools and offering to give more to others, he's actually recognizing the power that federal funding has to impact the education of students in need. However, it's sad that he's using this realization at the expense of desperate kids. Again, I want to be clear. Cutting federal funding could be a death blow to any student's chance of getting a good education. Trump is perfectly okay with leaving the most vulnerable students to fend for themselves if their state or district refuses to agree with his hateful and dangerous policies. Trump has also stated that on day 1, he plans on firing any Department of Education worker that is not fully cooperative with his demands.
Additionally, on day 1, we will begin to find and remove the radical zealots and Marxists who have infiltrated the federal Department of Education. And that also includes others, and you know who you are.
Even though that's not currently a power that the president possesses.
I will have them fired and escorted from the building. And I will tell Congress that any appropriations bill I sign must reaffirm the president's ability to remove defiant employees from the job.
Trump has locked onto the idea that un-American thinking has taken over schools and requires aggressive correction in ways that are not currently legal, claiming that Marxism, communism, and transgenderism have completely infiltrated and destroyed American education, stating many times that children are going to school and in one day are being converted physically from boys to girls.
Our opponents are using government schools to indoctrinate children, pushing radical transgender ideology on children, and changing the child's gender without even parental consent. Can you imagine that? Your child leaves for school and comes home, and their gender has been changed. I don't want to get into the details, but it's not even believable. Without parental consent. All of that's changing. It's changing immediately.
a claim that is comically wrong and does nothing but continue to vilify and scapegoat LGBTQ individuals. Trump has made banning trans women in school sports a top priority for education above all the real issues in American education.
We will keep men out of women's sports.
A problem that is genuinely so non-existent in every way possible. Only around 3% of high school students have at some point identified as transgender. One study conducted by an anti-trans group was only able to find 5 trans women competing on girls' sports teams through the grades of K through 12. That's a comically small number of trans kids to be competing when you look at how Trump and other conservatives have made this a top issue for American education.
We will get critical race theory and transgender insanity the hell out of our schools.
The entire point of school athletics is to socialize kids and allow them to have personal development. Only around 6% of high school athletes will ever be Division I in college, and only around 2% of those athletes will ever go pro in any sort of capacity. You can't sit here and seriously tell me that they believe the entire point of middle and high school athletics is so that 0.12% of total athletes can eventually go pro in some capacity. That's insane, and all the data shows that involving kids in extracurricular activities drastically improves mental health and educational outcomes. These policies are actively hurting many thousands of students over a non-existent problem by denying them access to all the benefits of athletics. Just one more little thing that I want to add. Sports have never been fair, especially public school sports, and they never will be. Even within biological males or females, there is no such thing as fairness. The variety of abilities is most pronounced in high school and middle school sports. You see students of every shape and size competing. To illustrate this point, look at someone like Victor Wembanyama, a young professional NBA player who has won the genetic lottery in every way. Players like Victor Wembanyama destroy the idea that there's any sort of biological fairness within same-sex teams. Should we ban Victor Wembanyama for just being the way he is? Absolutely not. We should be encouraging a variety of body types and abilities to be playing high school and middle school sports, but instead we're using a very small percent of the school population to scapegoat all the problems of education. This is all just part of the red herring that MAGA even cares about women's rights. They claim that they made these policies as a way to protect the rights of cis women, but we know that's just a cover for their hateful views. Let's talk about how Trump plans to remove parts of Title IX that would once again allow for open discrimination of trans students in schools. They also plan on repealing rights that affect all women in schools. This act would bring back the traumatic requirement for women who have been sexually assaulted in college to be publicly cross-examined and scrutinized by a lawyer in a courtroom. This will lead to more sexual crimes being unreported out of fear of this barbaric treatment. Trump also plans on removing even more Title IX protections. This will make it much harder for schools themselves to punish sexual offenders if the crime doesn't happen exactly on campus grounds. This means that schools would have a harder time kicking out or academically punishing their students who are found to have committed sexual offenses, instead being forced to defer punishment to an often corrupt law system alone or risk being sued by the offender. It's shocking that a cabinet full of men with accusations and charges want to make it easier to get away with those crimes. They disgustingly refer to these changes as restoring protections for women and girls, while openly stripping away their protections. As far as schools teaching history and social studies that educate students on the existence of ideologies that are critical of capitalism, such as Marxism or communism, Trump plans to ban that completely, dismissing critical thinking and analysis as radical propaganda. His education plan leaves no room for any critical analysis of the many factually horrible things that America has done, or acknowledging the many systemic issues that still exist today. As shown in Trump's 1776 commission, this only allows for unquestioning American exceptionalism to the point we are actively rewriting history to fit your narrative. We're going to see a rise in PragerU-style propaganda that the right has adopted in recent years. Propaganda such as excusing slavery as, quote, better than being killed, and downplaying the America's unique role in the transatlantic slave trade. One of the least talked about plans that Trump has for education is for a completely free college that would fast-track degrees and make education accessible for every American through something called the American Academy. Sounds great, right? Well, of course, there's many catches. We'll start with how Trump plans to pay for all this without adding a single dime to federal debt.
Without adding a single dime to the federal debt.
He plans on aggressively taxing, fining, and suing private university endowment funds for billions and billions of dollars. Endowment funds are donations given to schools with a specific purpose that they're invested, and the earnings from those investments are distributed back into certain areas or programs. It's a type of donation that's meant to give long-lasting support. These funds are meant to be used as rainy day savings or backup money in case of an emergency. Trump plans on taking billions of dollars from these endowments to fund the American Academy.
We will take the billions and billions of dollars that we will collect by taxing, fining, and suing excessively large private university endowments, and we will then use that money to endow a new institution called the American Academy.
But also using some of that money to somehow give reparations to Asian and white Americans who feel they have been wronged by a college because of perceived diversity, equity, and inclusion policies.
A portion of the seized funds will then be used as restitution for victims of these illegal and unjust policies that hurt our country so badly.
He will almost certainly target colleges and universities that refuse to bend to his will and not introduce his hateful education to their schools, leaving incredibly shady religious schools who often do discriminate openly mostly untouched. Trump promises that this school will cover the full spectrum of knowledge and skills, minus anything that they consider woke or political.
This institution will gather an entire universe of the highest quality educational content covering the full spectrum of human knowledge and skills. It will be strictly non-political, and there will be no wokeness or jihadism allowed. None of that's going to be allowed.
So to translate what he said into reality, the school will offer little to nothing in educational value, as they label anything that doesn't fit within their propaganda to be woke and political. This basic information will be brought to you by industries that support Trump and will be getting paid very well for this. In the American Academy, you'll be free to learn all about ancient history just without any of the context about why these things are happening, as that would involve discussing politics and dissenting ideology. Feel free to quickly obtain your STEM degree without having to take valuable and typically required ethics classes to help contextualize your new information. It should be an unsurprising red flag that the man who has shown no ethics sees no value in those classes. Ethics classes are going to teach you why the materials you use might make the product better in some way, but might come at the cost of funding child or slave labor, or that your materials might have a horrible impact on the environment, or the classes might simply remind you why it's ethically wrong to work for companies like Lockheed Martin, even if they are offering insane amounts of money. The best part of all this is that the American Academy is not a physical university. It will be an online program that will supposedly fast-track education in ways that are not currently possible. A glorified PragerU course is Trump's answer to higher education in America. According to Trump, this government-sponsored PragerU course would be worth the exact same as a bachelor's degree.
The Academy will award the full and complete equivalent of a bachelor's degree.
And all government jobs and contractors would be forced to recognize this degree as valid. This should be even more terrifying with the context that Trump has had experience opening and running a university before. For those of you who don't remember, Trump University was a real thing not too long ago.
At Trump University, we teach success. That's what it's all about, success. It's going to happen to you.
From 2005 to 2010, Trump University offered courses on topics such as real estate, asset management, and entrepreneurship. Trump University started out as an online service just like the American Academy would be, though Trump University soon expanded to a building in Florida where they taught real estate. Trump repeatedly boasted all the same talking points that he's now using for the American Academy, saying how it will be the highest quality education that you can get and how it will be taught by the best handpicked instructors.
We're going to have professors and adjunct professors that are absolutely terrific people, terrific brains, successful. We are going to have the best of the best.
The only problem is that none of this is true. Trump University was never a recognized university. They could never give credits, and they operated more like a shady timeshare pitch than a school. Potential students were lured in with a free seminar and were met with highly intense sales tactics, with the intentions of tempting desperate people with the promise that they too could be a rich real estate investor if they just simply joined Trump University. With classes ranging from $1,000 to $35,000, some people genuinely believed that Trump's promise would pan out for them. But sadly, we both know that that wasn't the case, and thousands of students were scammed out of their money.
They thought it was great, essentially.
Instead of being taught high-level insider information like they were promised, they were given surface-level basics. Instead of highly qualified hand-picked teachers, they were given random unqualified individuals Trump had never even met once.
And these are all people that are hand-picked by me.
Johnny Harris.
Too many years.
Ken Gosselin.
Too many years.
Mike Dubin.
The names sound familiar, just too many years.
Darren Liebman.
It's too many years.
Johnny Birkins.
I don't know.
Johnny Horton.
Too many years. And I'll win the Trump University case. I could settle that case. I could have settled it. I just choose not to.
Trump University was so bad that they were sued many times and as a result had to pay out over $25 million for these cases. When California Judge Gonzalo Curiel ruled against Trump's favor in 2016, Trump responded with racist comments about the judge.
The judge was appointed by Barack Obama, federal judge. His name is Gonzalo Curiel. The judge, who happens to be, we believe, Mexican, which is great. I think that's fine. He's a Mexican. We're building a wall between here and Mexico.
Why mention that the judge
Because
is
you know
Mexican?
what? Because I'm a man of principle.
Not that it should ever matter, but Judge Gonzalo Curiel was born and raised in Middle America, adding another layer of filth to the statements made by Trump. Trump University was also investigated in both Texas and Florida for other potential charges, but they were both dropped. In Texas, he was being investigated for defrauding millions of dollars from Texas taxpayers through Trump University, but the case was dropped on its way to reaching Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott, though it's important to note that it was later clarified that Deputy Attorney General David S. Morales later admitted that he was the one who dismissed the $5.4 million case without talking to Greg Abbott first. Trump later nominated David Morales as a district judge in Texas, showing thanks to the man who dismissed his charges of fraud and saved him many millions of dollars. In a completely unrelated note, longtime Trump supporter Greg Abbott was given $35,000 in political donations 2 years before the cases were dismissed. Greg Abbott was also a potential vice president pick for Donald Trump in the 2024 election right before he had picked J.D. Vance. In Florida, we saw something very similar play out. Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi announced that they were considering joining a lawsuit against Trump University. 4 days later, Pam Bondi received a $25,000 political donation from Trump and announced that she would be refusing to look further into the charges aimed at Trump University. This act of political corruption was so blatant that Trump was found to be violating the law and had to pay a fine of $2,500 to the IRS and later a $2 million fine for misusing his foundation to make such illegal donations. Don't worry though, if the name Pam Bondi sounds familiar, it could be her public ties to Scientology, receiving donations from them as she campaigned for Florida Attorney General. Or maybe the name sounds familiar because she was just handpicked by Trump to be the United States Attorney General. An openly corrupt Trump loyalist is going to be the head of the Department of Justice because of her turning the other way for the Trump University scandal and for her being an unwavering Trump defender during his impeachment.
Are you prepared to say today under oath without reservation that Donald Trump lost the presidential contest to Joe Biden in 2020?
President Biden is the President of the United States. He was duly sworn in, and he is the President of the United States. There was a peaceful transition of power. President Trump left office and was overwhelmingly elected in 2024.
Do you have any doubts that Joe Biden had the majority of votes, electoral votes, necessary to be elected president in 2020?
You know, Senator, all I can tell you as a prosecutor is from my firsthand experience.
They were peaceful people. These were great people. The crowd was unbelievable. And I mentioned the word love, the love in the air. I've never seen anything like it.
For any of his plans to ever work, Trump would have to massively deregulate education and roll back decades worth of protections. How him and his people mainly plan on doing this is to conceal the real intentions within concepts that sound great on the surface, but have dark motives behind them. Mostly we're talking about the concept of school choice and its partner concept of school vouchers.
I believe that school choice is the civil rights issue of our time. A child's fate should be determined by it has to be determined by their love of education, by their parents, by so many factors.
Simply explained, school choice is the idea that education would benefit from a free market approach where parents are free to choose what schools their kids go to that most align with their needs and educational goals. Ideally, this approach would promote successful teaching methods and offer specialized schools for any student's needs. Vouchers would ideally make this transition from public schools to private institutions and homeschooling more smooth for those in need, providing funds that would have been spent on that student's public education directly to the parents to spend on their child's education themselves. This money could be spent on private schools, religious schools, or homeschooling materials. In exchange for this money, the parent agrees to completely leave the public school system and be responsible for their child's education. This concept is right at the top of Trump's plans for education in America. This idea, however, is nothing new and has been consistently proposed in America for at least 70 years. This concept even found success right away in the mid-50s. In 1954, we saw one of the most important rulings in American history that declared segregation in schools to be unconstitutional. However, this obviously did nothing to stem the already deeply entrenched racism of the time. In an effort to avoid desegregation, Southern private schools offered white-only vouchers that encouraged white families to abandon public school to be part of their all-white private schools that were free from government intervention. This concept was greatly boosted by anti-government Darling and criticized economist Milton Friedman. An influential economist of his time, he took great interest in promoting the racist pro-segregation movement as it aligned with his stance that the government should not be involved in education, and that the government's choice to enforce desegregation is as immoral as it would be to enforce segregation.
If it is appropriate for the state to say that individuals may not discriminate in employment because of color or race or religion, then it is equally appropriate for the state, provided a majority can be found to vote that way, to say that individuals must discriminate in employment on the basis of color, race, or religion. Now, you will all recognize that that is exactly what has happened in the interim, as you have moved from the idea of non-discrimination to the idea of affirmative action. Temporarily, that affirmative action may benefit some blacks, but those problems are problems that should be worked on by these communities among their own people by themselves through voluntary activities.
Though he stated publicly that he doesn't like segregation, he happily used the momentum of a racist movement to further his own goals. He rebranded their hateful ideas to be about school choice. That is, the right of the parent to be able to send their child to the best school that they can send them to. And if that just so happens to be an all-white private school, so be it. Milton Friedman's support greatly delayed desegregation efforts as it concentrated wealth and funding into these all-white private schools, leaving public schools to be the de facto segregated schools, receiving little to no funding as their resources were being taken away with these vouchers. This continued all the way up until the late 60s before the banning of said voucher systems, as they are openly going against Brown v. Board of Education. We can see that Trump has promised to bring back school choice for the exact same reasons that we saw in the 50s. A white politician unhappy with the government for being able to protect the rights of its people from their hateful views. Trump and his advisors benefit greatly from making public education as unappealing and broken as possible, as it makes their goals of completely privatizing education easier and easier.
Make them shape up or close down. If under a voucher scheme they continue to offer poor schooling, well then the parents will take the children out and send them to private schools, and the public schools will have to contract and close down.
Requesting systems like merit-based pay once again sound reasonable until you realize this is just another tool to punish the poor, minorities, and those with special needs. Merit-based pay assumes that schools exist in a vacuum where the only factors that affect a student's learning are within the classroom alone. But we know that's not true. Poor kids don't often have the luxury to just focus on school alone. Issues such as hunger, housing, lack of sleep, or being responsible for family care means that these students just aren't able to learn at their full potential while at school. That's why you're naturally going to see higher testing from private schools regardless of the actual quality of education. Private schools simply just don't have to accept everyone. They do have certain laws around admissions to get federal funding, but there's many ways around that, and this assumes that they're being held accountable in the first place. And that's something that Trump's plans are going to make it much harder to do. After all of the well-off students that can afford private school leave, what you're going to be left with in public schools are all of the marginalized students together in an underfunded school taught by teachers that will be punished through no fault of their own because of merit-based pay. Trump plans to do the same style of deregulation and privatization in higher education as well. With drastically less resources, students going to public school will have a much harder time affording college. Grants, scholarships, and loans obtained with a FAFSA are often the only way that many Americans can justify higher education. But these things could quickly disappear under the next administration's policies. They've singled out student aid as being a problem area and would rather aggressively cut resources for the needy than address the rising tuition costs and the predatory student loan system. All of that was just Trump's public plans for education, but we know better than just to look at that. Let's look at what Project 2025 has planned for education. I'm going to keep this quick, as when I read Project 2025's 40-something page section on education, it was shockingly similar to Trump's Agenda 47. Project 2025 just has more freedom to be open with their hateful plans. The section on education was written by Long-Term Heritage Foundation Education Director Lindsay Burke. As she is a fanatical follower of Milton Friedman, we can see how Milton's brutal indifference to those who have been systemically abused has lived on and continues to be pushed by the right. Lindsay uses her platform to promote Milton Friedman's ideology to a T, but with a more modern twist. First and foremost, the clear desire of Project 2025 is to privatize education in America, making every stage of education for profit, and as a result, worse for the average American. This is exactly why Milton Friedman was and still is so opposed. He would completely gut all government protections if he could, and often thinks in absolutes, such as government programs either being profitable or not, with little to no room for public services. He believed that almost any government assistance or intervention imposes on the rights of every citizen and therefore shouldn't exist.
If you think that there's a way out of this by getting government to pass laws especially to benefit the blacks, you're kidding yourself. That isn't going to happen.
This is fundamentally flawed and is only a position that you can hold if you're both someone who isn't systemically disadvantaged and you don't care about those who are. He asserts that if the government did not involve itself in pursuing public betterment, then everyone would benefit from increased rights, making it easier for everyone to use the resources, producing better outcomes. Though this ignores everything we know to be true about history. To even suggest that you'd be okay with leaving outcomes up to what resources you have growing up when people like Elon Musk and Trump had infinite resources growing up is cruel and disgusting. The rich have the resources to pick the best schools for their kids and can teach them any way they would like, with the only thing limiting them are the government's protections for the average and disadvantaged Americans. It's only the government that asserts that schools should remain desegregated. It's only because of the government that schools should not be allowed to openly teach hate, that every student be given a chance at education regardless if it's profitable or not. Friedman's ideology views all of this as red tape that should be done away with, offering the false promise that anyone can have this same level of freedom of choice if we just deregulated education and embraced a free market approach.
What this proposal for the voucher scheme does is to make available to lower and middle income parents the same range of alternatives that those of us in the upper income classes have now.
Although they promise infinite options of education under this system, we know that at the end of the day, it's up to the private schools to choose which students they accept and which ones they reject. And to be okay with what we know the consequences of this will be shows a gross lack of humanity. Average people like you or me have no chance to get into one of these personalized schools that they promise. Your odds are even worse if you have higher support needs or live far from a major city, like many Americans do. As Project 2025 points to Arizona as a successful example of school choice and voucher systems, we can look there to see what they have planned for the rest of America. Vouchers in Arizona were originally exclusively for children in special education, giving schools money to then give to the parents of that student. This was for the most part a great program that was well-intentioned. I found many first-hand accounts saying how this program was life-changing for their child's education. This allowed parents to either buy important supplies for their child's education or help pay for tuition for a school that focused exclusively on their child's special needs. But this program soon ran into logistical issues that caused long delays in the time that it took to receive aid. This program was later closed partly because of legal issues with giving money directly to schools rather than to the parents. Vouchers were later brought back to Arizona through something called the Empowerment Scholarship Account, or ESA for short. This time around, the vouchers would be available to everyone, and the money would be given directly to the parents instead. A program that once had good intentions of helping those in special education was now open to anyone and everyone who wanted public school money and was ripe to be taken advantage of. Since 2022, the ESA voucher program has seen mass adoption of over 70,000 students. In exchange for agreeing not to attend public schools, parents were receiving access to public school money that was now theirs to spend however they want, long as it was within the ESA's vague guidelines. The amount of money parents received is partly based on the average of how much their local school district is spending per student. Since a school's funding typically comes from property taxes, wealthy areas could potentially be starting with higher paying ESA vouchers. The ESA funding amount will go up from there based on their child's grade level and if their child has special education needs, with around 53% of students receiving $6,000 to $7,000 per year and around 10% of students receiving between $10,000 and $30,000 per year. The lowest a student could have received is $4,626, and that's supposed to be paying for an entire year of education. So we know around half of all students in this program are receiving half the average tuition cost for schools in Arizona. This means that around half of all parents would still have to fork out thousands of dollars if they wanted their child to attend a private school. And that's just for tuition. That's not counting any additional expenses that the private school might charge on top of that. This program was originally proposed to save the taxpayer money, but is now bleeding money and going way over budget. Originally, this program was meant to cost around $100 million in its first 2 years of operation. However, in its first year alone, the program cost taxpayers around $300 million and is expected to cost another $400 million just this year alone, totaling to potentially over $700 million in just 2 years of operation. It's not the cost of the education that's a problem, it's who and where this money is going to that's so problematic. As SOS Arizona Network points out, 61% of ESA voucher funding is going to just 10% of school districts, concentrated in wealthy suburban areas. At times, this funding has primarily gone to students who were not enrolled in public schools, but rather already enrolled in private schools or homeschooling. Anywhere from 53% to 79% of the students who received this voucher didn't attend public school the previous year, meaning hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars were funneled directly into for-profit private schools and religious schools. And that's without considering the rampant fraud that is almost certainly going on because of how vulnerable the system is. There's been a shocking number of wealthy students attending private school who were accepted into the program, providing them with anywhere from $3,000 to $30,000 of taxpayer money to do with as they please with limited oversight. There have already been many accounts of wealthy families using these vouchers to buy things such as ski resort passes, a grand piano, martial arts lessons, and many more questionable things. The point is that every dollar given to these wealthy families that would never even consider attending a public school is money that's actively being taken away from the public schools that marginalized students are disproportionately still attending, furthering the educational gap between poor and wealthy families. We can see this very clearly if we look at the enrollment for the voucher program by zip code. There's a giant correlation between the median income of a zip code and how many students are enrolled in the voucher program. There are plenty of reasons why poor and average families might not know how to use this program, or reasons why this program just might not work for them at all. Whether it's lack of information, lack of transportation, lack of ESA funding, or simply no schooling options around them. Poor families are losing quality of education because taxpayer money is being taken away from their public schools and put into the education and entertainment of more wealthy families. When a student receives funds from the voucher program, it's not as simple as just taking that amount of money out from a bank account that was set aside for that student. Schools are given a budget at the start of the year so that they can plan on how they're going to pay for everything that they need to run that school. That means employees, building costs, programs, sports, you name it. Schools do the best that they can with the budget that they're given. Schools often go up to or over their budget. With a massive amount of students pulling out, schools now have to provide money that just isn't available anymore. That money's already been spent. This forces schools to cut away at valuable programs or even risk completely closing if their enrollment drops enough. This could potentially create educational deserts where public schools simply just aren't available. But that's exactly what Project 2025 is more than happy to create. They use Milton Friedman's views that education should follow the free market, and if a school is failing, they're more than happy to see it closed down as if it was any other business and not a public service. Here's a brief list of what Project 2025 wants for the future of American education. As you probably guessed, they also want to get rid of the Department of Education completely. The motives behind this are pretty obvious. The plans that they want to enforce greatly infringe on the rights of all students. So obviously they want to get rid of what's basically the last line of defense for all students' rights.
Just really quick history. If you look at federal involvement in education from, let's say, about 1867, when there was actually a push for a federal Department of Ed, successful, but it gets demoted a year later to a small office of education. So if you fast forward from that point until about 100 years later, until the Johnson administration comes in, 1965, the Great Society efforts launched. During that century, there's basically no federal involvement in education. There are a few programs here and there.
I wonder what major federal involvement started to happen around 100 years later that her and her people seem to be so against. They also want to remove just about every form of financial aid that actually gives back to the people most in need. This means student loans, Pell Grants, and many more services. What's even worse is that they float the idea of getting rid of the government's ability to give student loans, instead wanting to give this power to private companies that would ensure that they get their money back. We already know what happens when we introduce private companies into student loans. Just like with Trump's plan, they want to remove all specific discrimination protections for LGBTQ students, as well as banning all language from schools and government that suggests there's anything other than biological male and female. They plan on completely getting rid of Title I funding as soon as possible, with no excuse of why they want to remove something that so many Americans owe their education to. They want to make it easier to open and run regressive private schools that'll have little to no oversight, ensuring that there will be horrible abuses of power. They'd also like to give tax cuts for donations to educational nonprofits that'll only benefit the rich and the schools that they support. They'd like to end what they call radical student loan forgiveness, even though many Americans support some type of student loan forgiveness. They'd like to continue to protect religious schools to freely discriminate against their students without repercussions. Put an end to what they call radical free lunch programs for K through 12. And lastly, they want to require the Department of Education to write a report on how teaching real history negatively impacts students' feelings towards America. I want to point out one thing that's incredibly clear when you read Project 2025's plans for education. It was clear to me right away how open they are with their plans to privatize education and destroy public schools as much as possible. But the more I thought about it and read other sections of Project 2025, I realized that their plans for education mostly seem to serve one overarching goal. They realize that the easiest way to fix the drastic drop in military enlistment for youth is through destroying education for the average American. They're crushing K-12 public schools and planning to make college less and less accessible by taking away federal aid that most Americans depend on. When they talk about how easy it is for normal people to get government assistance for education, it's clear to see how angry this makes them. For a long time, the promise of higher education was one of the main selling points that made signing your life away to the US government even somewhat attractive. But now with government aid and so many jobs offering to cover some if not all of your education, it's really hard to convince kids to go risk potentially becoming pink mist for a chance at higher education. This is a huge problem for all the warmongers, and it seems they picked the easiest solution to try and fix this. By destroying public education, you make the military seem more appealing without actually addressing any of the reasons why it was unappealing in the first place. The military has nothing to offer that would make more young people want to join, since most of them are disillusioned with the propaganda and false promises already. We know how America treats their veterans, more often than not leaving them disabled with little to no follow-up care. Instead of addressing the large systemic issues that are only getting bigger, they've decided to ensure more Americans have less options and are more willing to join the military out of desperation.
You know, it's like eliminate federal education now, moving on to national security.
Right, next. Exactly. Well, and look, you mentioned national security. I think that's a good segue into why we framed it the way that we did and how conservatives think about the proper role of the federal government, if any, in education. Education, as everybody knows, is simply not an enumerated power of the federal government. If you crack open your Constitution, you will not find the word education anywhere in it.
Without going too much more into detail, these are most of the concepts behind Project 2025's part on education. The only difference between these two policies is how extreme they're willing to admit the end goals are. It doesn't matter how many times Trump says he disavows Project 2025 if he has their exact same plan that's written and directed by more or less the same people. Project 2025 just says the quiet parts out loud. To still believe that these two plans aren't one and the same is just not based in reality. Alright, stick with me. This next part might seem a little strange or unrelated, but it's so important to the story. So with all of that covered, who do you think Trump has put in charge of the future of American education? Well, it's no other than his longtime friend and one of his biggest donors for every single election, Linda McMahon. In case you don't know who she is, let me give you a quick rundown of who she is and why Trump picked her specifically for this role. We really can't talk about who Linda McMahon is without talking about her estranged husband, Vince McMahon. They've known each other for most of their lives, with Linda meeting Vince at the age of 13 and marrying him right out of high school when she was 17 and Vince was 21. She attended East Carolina University and received a bachelor's in French as well as a teaching certificate after passing state testing. Linda and Vince struggled for a few years before Vince eventually joined his father to be a ringside announcer for his wrestling company. Even with things starting to go well for them, they had more issues during this time. Filing bankruptcy partly due to poor investing into a failed Evel Knievel stunt.
Okay, Evel, stay with the bird, stay with the bird. Just cleared the rocks, thank God.
A very costly construction company, as well as having years of unpaid taxes. The McMahons worked together and eventually bought out his father's company shares, as well as a few others for over $1 million, and was now in charge of the entertainment giant known as the World Wrestling Federation. Stay with me here, we're getting to the point. They took this already well-off company and through aggressive poaching of famous wrestlers such as Hulk Hogan, new one-of-a-kind television deals, and incredibly risky events such as WrestleMania, they made this company into something impossibly bigger. They were selling out giant stadiums, making millions per event. The McMahons put wrestling into the public consciousness like never before, and everyone was eating it up. Times were quickly changing in the early 80s and 90s, and the WWF took full advantage of this. They were making insane, one-of-a-kind entertainment that rode the line between a traditionally family-friendly show and a violent counterculture experience. Vince and Linda fully understood that they were not in the wrestling business at all. They were in the business of entertainment. That sounds like a really small distinction, but this perspective was very unique for the time and gave them an unstoppable edge over all the traditional wrestling companies. One by one, they all start to either fail as a business, merge with competitors, or even be acquired by Vince himself as they just couldn't keep up with the McMahon strategy. I'm giving you this brief summary of entertainment wrestling as this leads exactly into who Linda McMahon is, but also Vince McMahon and even Donald Trump himself. Let's make this clear. While Vince McMahon is the corporate face of what is now the WWE, Linda has always been there, pushing the company along, and without her, none of this would exist. Vince knew how to make controversial entertainment, but he was never the businessman. The entire time, it was Linda. She was the McMahon who pushed the business into stardom. She was responsible for securing marketing deals, pushing merchandise on the public, and securing large-scale television deals. She is an intelligent, cutthroat businesswoman who made billions of dollars for her company and even more billions of dollars for herself. She was in charge behind the scenes during almost every single horrible scandal that happened at the WWE. I'm going to go over a few of them now. Viewer discretion is advised as these are very serious topics. These scandals include, but are not limited to, a huge drug scandal that accused the McMahons of knowing about and condoning large amounts of steroid use for the wrestlers. Though there was a lot of evidence supporting Vince McMahon's involvement, he was later acquitted on these charges. The WWE was also known for having some of the worst working conditions of any entertainment job in America. So many cases of wrestlers being horribly injured, stuck with irreversible lifelong pain and CTE like in the tragic case of Chris Benoit, or even dying at work trying to entertain like in the case of Owen Hart. So it shouldn't surprise you that the wrestlers wanted protections in the form of a union. They kept quiet about this so that Vince wouldn't be able to stop them. That was until Vince somehow found out and put an end to all the talk of unionizing. Pro wrestler Jesse Ventura later found out that the rat was none other than superstar Hulk Hogan.
And he's the one that ratted me to Vince when I tried to unionize. I found that out under federal deposition when Vince was put under sworn, and he didn't hesitate at all. And so I wanted to know who ratted me in the locker room because there were no agents, no one from the office was in there when I did it. So it had to be one of the boys. And when my attorney said, Mr. McMahon, has there ever been a union in wrestling? And Vince said, no. He said, has anyone ever tried to? And Vince said, well, I think Jesse Ventura spouted his mouth off about it once before. And my attorney said, did you hear Mr. Ventura? No. Well, then how do you know he did? With no hesitation, Vince went, Hulk Hogan told me.
Known racist and future MAGA puppet.
All the real Americans are going to be nicknamed Trumpites because all the Trumpites are going to be running wild for 4 years. Enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
Hulk Hogan snitched on his fellow performers so that he could stay in the pocket of Vince McMahon. Jesse Ventura has a theory of why he believes Hulk Hogan happily ratted out the other performers.
When we went to court, I saw in WrestleMania 3, Hogan got paid more than all of us combined. Now, why would he want a union when he's getting taken care of? Imagine that, WrestleMania 3, 93,000 people, and he got more than Andre the Giant and all the rest of us combined. If there was a union, would that happen? No.
One of the worst scandals that ever hit the WWE is something that would later be known as the Ring Boy Scandal, where allegedly, the McMahons were well aware that their ring announcer Mel Phillips was molesting young boys that helped set up the wrestling rings for their shows and did nothing about it. They put Mel Phillips on leave for 1 year for his disgusting behavior in 1988, only to rehire him once again, giving him access to kids once again where he continued to sexually assault young boys before being let go a second time.
First he was put on suspension pending investigation, and the investigation was taking so long, there was so much negative happening with it that we finally told Mel that it was better for him and better for our company for him to go on in a different way.
It was even reported by Business Insider that Vince and Linda were doing everything that they could to make the entire story go away with little to no thought for the victimized kids.
McMahon doesn't deny Phillips had a foot fetish, but she said it had become a joke and was blown out of proportion.
You call a man filming your feet for hours at a time and playing with your feet and making you cry when you're only 13 years old and recording it for his own sexual purposes. If she calls that normal, then obviously there's something wrong with her also.
The most outspoken of the victims, Tom Cole, was given a settlement and a chance to work for the WWE on the condition that he was able to have good grades in the community college that he would be going to. Cole said that because of his trauma being abused, he was unable to keep up good grades in school. As a result, Linda McMahon personally fired Tom Cole, the child that was sexually assaulted by an employee of the McMahon's company. She made the choice to fire. In the last words of her termination letter to Tom, she wrote, "Again, Tom, I find this action truly regrettable. The opportunity of a lifetime is a terrible thing to waste." After firing Tom, Linda went on to downplay the alleged actions of Mel Phillips, saying that his attractions were just a joke, blown out of proportion. That was until later completely denying Tom was ever sexually assaulted, instead saying he was just a confused boy.
We took an opportunity to help a young man who, for whatever reason, seemed confused, he seemed troubled, and wanted to have an opportunity in life, and we felt that we could help him.
Tom Cole never received justice from the McMahons, and later in life committed suicide, leaving behind a wife and 3 daughters. The Ring Boy case was just opened again against the McMahons, as the statute of limitations has changed, allowing other victims who are now adults to come forward. We should also point out the WWE's close ties to Saudi Arabia that should alarm you, partnering with them despite their horrible record of human rights violations as well as several high-profile political assassinations, including the murder of Jamal Khashoggi that several wrestlers spoke out against in protest. There have been countless other sexual assault allegations that have happened in the WWE. Just to highlight one that I feel is important to know, let's talk about the sexual assault of Ashley Massaro that took place during a WWE military partnership that sent their performers to Kuwait in 2006. Ashley told executives, allegedly including Vince McMahon himself, exactly how she was drugged and sexually assaulted while in Kuwait. The WWE allegedly urged her not to make this public as it might hurt their reputation and relations with the military. The WWE denied any knowledge of this publicly, even though an attorney later stated that most of the higher-ups at the WWE knew of the allegations. This would certainly include the McMahons if true. Reportedly, it was Vince McMahon himself that made Ashley's life hell at work as retaliation for her story as well as rejecting his advances. He personally wrote horrible scripts for her that she was forced to follow. This included a behind-the-scenes section of an event where Vince McMahon pretends to fire her while violently berating her. This treatment was cruel and unusual, and Ashley soon left the WWE.
I feel terrible.
You're gonna cry now?
Vince, don't do this! No, this
You're gonna cry! You're gonna cry! You're suspended indefinitely!
Ashley was part of a class action lawsuit against the WWE in 2016. However, this was dismissed in 2018. And only a few months after this ruling, after not showing up to work, she too was found to have committed suicide. There are endless allegations and charges specifically against Vince McMahon, including rape, sexual harassment, and even sex trafficking. When asked if he had raped a female referee, his response was genuinely insane.
Once you're accused of rape, you're a rapist. But it was consensual, and actually, had it been a rape, the statute of limitations had run out.
Though Linda is only specifically named in a few of these cases, we can see a clear pattern of vile and despicable things happening under her watch as co-owner and later CEO of the WWE.
We are families. As a CEO, I never expected employees to do anything I was not willing to do myself.
She's also been accused many times of at best being ignorant to crime happening right in front of her, or at worst turning a blind eye to all the darkness going on under her watch. It shouldn't surprise you that with all this money, fame, and controversy that the McMahons would attract the attention of none other than Donald Trump himself. They apparently met for the first time at a Rolling Stones concert that Trump invited Vince to. They built a strong relationship, bonding over their similarities and how they run their businesses. Trump took a strong liking to Vince McMahon as they are very similar in all the worst ways.
Vince McMahon is another one. He's fantastic. Yeah. He's a fantastic guy. And one of the best ever.
Yeah.
This led to many collaborations between Trump and the WWE. This includes a 2007 gimmick for WrestleMania 23 that they dubbed Battle of the Billionaires. Here we got to see Trump go blow for blow with his good friend Vince McMahon. A battle of two good friends where the loser would have to shave their head, and of course Vince McMahon lost.
I did a fight with Vince, the Battle of the Billionaires. It's still supposedly the #1 ranked pay-per-view fight that they've ever had, which makes me feel happy.
And in 2013, where he was put in the WWE Hall of Fame for celebrities. These mini collaborations was just their beginning with Donald Trump. All of this led up to the McMahons donating absurd amounts of money to Trump over the years. They gave Trump over $9 million up through 2009. According to Forbes, these donations single-handedly provided 95% of the funding to Trump's personal foundation. Linda McMahon also personally donated over $7 million to Trump's 2016 presidency, as well as over $10 million to his 2024 presidency. Linda also tried twice to brute force buy her way into the Senate, failing both times miserably. She managed to spend around $100 million of her own money in the process just to be rejected by the public when they were reminded who she is. This was even part of a WWE storyline where Vince wakes from a coma after hearing how much money she's spending on her own campaign.
Very composed considering she spent $50 million on this campaign.
It's funny because they freak out that she spent over $50 million on her first campaign and lost. She went on to do this a second time, losing again, spending once again around $100 million of her own money trying to buy her way into the government and failing. After she completely fails to buy her way into the Senate, she was determined to buy her way into the government the only way that she knew how, by donating money to Donald Trump. All it took was a combined $21 million in donations, and she had her way into the government, much cheaper than her Senate run. In 2016, Trump rewarded one of his most loyal donors, Linda McMahon, with a seat in the government. She was appointed as the head of small business administrations and served up until the end of Trump's first term, where she stepped down and became a leader in Trump's 2020 re-election campaign. She also took a leadership role in Trump's American First Action, a Trump-focused super fund that helped bankroll Trump's campaigns. This pact is connected to the American First Policy Institute, a very shady nonprofit that promotes almost all the same hateful ideas as Project 2025, and has allegedly been used by the NRA to donate to Trump illegally. This nonprofit also enjoys platforming hateful individuals such as Charlie Kirk, who continues to produce white nationalist propaganda aimed at disenfranchised young white men. His racist and hateful beliefs seep into his organization's policies. Linda is, of course, also on the board of directors for the America First Policy Institute alongside Pam Bondi. All of this comes together on November 19th, 2024, when Trump announces that among the other insane picks for his cabinet, he has picked Linda McMahon to serve as the United States Secretary of Education. In Trump's announcement tweets, he puts heavy emphasis on her pushing the so-called school choice on a national level. The same school choice that we know just to be a dog whistle for removing the rights of the marginalized and funneling money from taxpayers into the hands of private for-profit schools that will erode the quality of education for all but the 1%. While it's not yet confirmed, it seems like Linda McMahon will be spearheading the future of education in America. I think the problems with her being Trump's nominee are very clear. She is completely unqualified for the highest position in education, less than 2 years on the Connecticut Board of Education, and she was on the board of trustees for a rich and private Christian college to help manage funds. She has a lengthy history of supposedly turning a blind eye to victims under her jurisdiction and was the head of a company that grossly abused their workers on many occasions. And lastly, Linda McMahon, like almost all appointed cabinet members by Trump, have donated millions and millions of dollars to stay in Trump's good graces and assure he gets to power. No matter where you stand politically, you should be able to agree that ultra-rich individuals should not be able to just buy their way into power with what feels like no pushback. Even Trump from 2016 agrees.
But, you know, guys like Karl Rove,
He spends hundreds of millions of dollars on campaigns. He wins nothing. He wins nothing. There are some people that are losers, okay? But how about if we do the, no, they're losers. They're losers. And that's the problem. We can't have that. We can't have that with the Republican Party. We have to get the right people.
People like Elon Musk, Linda McMahon, Kelly Loeffler, Charles Kushner, and Pam Bondi. All of these people and so many more are only in the positions of power that they're in because they have either thrown absurd amounts of money at Trump in the tune of many millions, have been undying loyalists, or have done illegal favors for Trump in the past. You should feel insulted that Trump doesn't even feel like he has to hide how horribly corrupt his picks are. I spent so much time talking about the WWE partly because it felt so unbelievable as I learned how deep the rabbit hole goes, but mainly because it's a shining example of how horrible the people who Trump has picked to run the government are, as well as how deeply connected all these horrible people are. They all know each other and they're all still friends because they can all relate to each other. Vince McMahon and Trump get along so well with each other because they're basically the same person. Rich white dudes who have a long history of racism.
Yeah, what's good in the hood?
Just holding it down, trying to take care of business.
Keep it up. I'm a
and allegations of sexual assault. They've both used the statute of limitations as an excuse for sexual assault charges.
And she said, I was making out with her, that I grabbed her at a certain part, and that was when she had enough. Now, so think of how the impracticality of this. I'm famous. I'm in a plane. People are coming into the plane. And I'm looking at a woman, and I grab her, and I start kissing her and making out with her. What are the chances of that happening? What are the chances? I'll admit it.
Whoa.
I did try and fuck her. She was married.
That's huge news there.
No, Nancy. Yeah. No, this was marriages, and I moved on her very heavily. In fact, I took her out furniture shopping. I moved on her like a bitch, but I couldn't get there, and she was married. I better use some Tic Tacs just in case I start kissing her. You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. I can do anything. And frankly, I know you're going to say it's a terrible thing to say, but it couldn't have happened. It didn't happen. And she would not have been the chosen one. She would not have been the chosen one.
Both good friends with another man who we know to be horrible.
A 1992 party at Mar-a-Lago. Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein shared a joke and a laugh.
These are the people Trump wants to be in power, not despite who they are, but because of who they are. Linda McMahon will almost certainly be the next 4 years of education in America, and that's genuinely terrifying. A hateful billionaire is going to be setting the goals and priorities for education when we know for a fact what team she plays for. The bottom line is that Trump picked Linda McMahon because she's proven that she's loyal to Trump above all else. She's a champion of Trump and is fanatical when she speaks about him.
Donald Trump is not only a fighter, ladies and gentlemen, he is a good man. He has the heart of a lion and the soul of a warrior. And I believe that if necessary, he would stand at the gates of hell to defend our country. He loves this country, and he would do anything to defend it and to protect us from all harm.
At the end of the day, she's a brutal businesswoman, and that's exactly what Trump wants from her as Secretary of Education. Someone who will aggressively cut costs, coldly remove protections for the marginalized, and massively deregulate education in ways that only one of the richest and most shrewd businesswomen in America could. I spent most of this video talking about what are their plans for education and why everything we know screams how horrible this could be for the average American who has no idea what's at stake. And that's just it. These people that are making the policies for us have nothing at stake. They have nothing to lose. Trump didn't go to public school. He doesn't know what it's like to attend a school that just wouldn't exist without federal funding. And he has no idea what it's like to have a FAFSA decide if he can go to college or not. Him and his people don't know and don't care. If and when their plans hurt public education, it just won't affect them. Their kids are all going to expensive private schools far removed from the realities of public schools. We won't see the long-term effects of degrading the quality of education until long after these people are out of office. There are many, many problems with education in America that range from gun violence, student treatment, school lunch, special education, discrimination, and so much more. But all they seem to care about is trans kids in sports and how expensive it is to educate the disadvantaged. Even the right does agree that there's a clear disparity in educational outcomes based on wealth. But their answer for this is to completely take resources away from the public school system and just let poor families figure it out for themselves. Many Americans are begging for relief from predatory student loans, and in turn, the right promises to put an immediate end to all student loan forgiveness. The point is that everyone can see the horribly flawed education system we have. The difference seems to be that these people are more than happy with just lighting a match and watching the whole system burn down to the ground, with no answers for the most vulnerable kids that will be left in what remains. This video genuinely isn't meant to just scare you or fearmonger some sort of worst case scenario. I chose the topic of education because I feel like it's something that we can all relate to in some way. I care a lot about the future of education in America, and I think most people do as well. We all want kids to have the best education that they can, but there's a clear group of rich politicians who just don't want that. I knew I had to look into what Trump winning could mean for American education when I saw this clip of him being asked a genuine question about how can he improve education in America, and he answered with this.
What are we going to do to improve that in our school systems?
Well, we're moving them back from Washington, where you have people that don't care about New York, frankly. You know, in Washington, I don't know if you ever noticed this, you go Department of Education, Department of Education. You got half the buildings are Department of Education. I never saw. You don't need any of them. You know, I want one person and a secretary to just make sure they're teaching English, okay? Give it a little English, okay? I say reading, writing, and arithmetic. No transgender, no operations. You know, they take your kid. There are some places. Your boy leaves the school, comes back, a girl, okay? Without parental consent. What is that all about? That's when they talk about a threat to democracy, they're a threat. Could you imagine, without parental consent? At first, when I was told that was actually happening, I said, you know, it's an exaggeration. No, it happens. It happens. There are areas where it happens. We're not going to let it happen.
Seeing him incoherently ramble about how needlessly big the Department of Education is, which remember is the smallest cabinet department by far, and then without skipping a beat start rambling about how schools are taking kids and forcefully changing their gender was somehow still shocking. I've even talked to a few Trump voters who have no clue what his education policies are other than banning trans athletes and getting rid of woke. These people are actively voting against their own interests and supposed morals with no idea of what Trump and his people have planned for their kids. I can't stress this enough. If your average American clearly knew what his plans for education were and what that means for everyday people, they would be strongly against all of this regardless of their political affiliations. I really do hope that I'm completely wrong about my fears for education under the Trump administration. It's not funny schools are going to get a lot worse, and it's not funny that we're going to see many Trump supporters shocked that their kids will have less and less resources to work with, especially in rural areas that depend on federal aid so much more. If you're worried about everything that's coming our way, it's important that you don't feel helpless. Educate yourself on all the history that you can and remind your friends and family that these billionaires don't care about you and their policies will be on the wrong side of history. This is by far the biggest video I've ever made, so please give me your feedback in the comments below and I'll definitely respond the best that I can. I really did try to be as civil and factual as I could in this video, but obviously these are very serious topics and I'm not perfect. This was a crazy long video and I was only able to use a small percent of the months of research that I put into making this video. So I'll be putting as many of the most important resources that I can in the description. Please be safe, take care, and do something nice for the people around you.